Great. Jen, thank you so much for that. And thanks for having me here today. And thank you all for showing up for this. Let's quickly explain who I am and what this is all about. So I've been a resident of Connecticut for 50 plus years. I was started off as a journalist. I worked at the NPR station in Boston, WBUR, then went into commercial radio as a news director here in Western Connecticut. Did some work for the New York Times on the side. Switched over into government, was press secretary for the mayor of Danbury for a few years. And then got recruited into corporate for 25 years and got to go internationally, Switzerland, a few other places, and travel around in communications and marketing. In retirement, I started a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing, just got involved because I love Connecticut history. One thing led to another, and as Jenny said, I've now done 195 episodes. The latest one actually coming out today, this being Thursday, because there's a new one every Thursday. And about, I don't know, a few months ago, probably 5 months ago, a woman named Lori Hunt, who was the sixth grade social studies teacher in Suffield, contacted me and said, Mike, I probably should have asked permission, but I used two of your podcast episodes in my class here to work with my students as a teacher's aide, and it's been really successful. And I'm using it for history and for geography. And have you ever thought about sharing this with the rest of the social studies teachers around the state? And I said, no, I actually hadn't thought about that. It's a great idea. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the podcast. As Jenny said, focus primarily on the Connecticut 250 episodes so you can see what's there, touch a little bit on some of the other topics, and then show you a tool that I have, a searchable Excel spreadsheet that you can use to find topics of interest. So, without any further ado, I did launch this podcast a little more than 3.5 years ago. The 195 episodes coming up to the 200th, and I have no idea what I'm going to do on my 200th yet, so I've got to figure that out. But there's been coming up on 350,000 downloads. Apple Podcasts, I have a 4.9 rating out of 5, and it's like most podcasts available wherever you get your podcasts. So my purpose here today is to make all these podcast episodes available to you, the social studies teachers in Connecticut, for free. I have stories from throughout Connecticut. A lot of them, as you're going to see, are Revolutionary War related and CT 250 related. And there are other categories that you might find of interest. Lori did up in Suffield. The basic formula and format of the program is that it's storytelling. It's not a lot of dates. It's not a lot of memorization. It's telling stories. And I find, luckily, very incredible guests who are experts in their field. And I know just enough to be dangerous and ask hopefully good questions. It gets good information out of them. Of course, as we know, students today respond to podcasts, and they have to this one as well. I don't know how familiar you are with the different social media platforms, but for example, I have a pretty heavy following on Facebook, but that tends to skew into an older age group. But Reddit and Instagram, which tend to skew younger, I have quite a following on that as well. Plus, I do public speaking on the side, and I have parents who bring, elementary school age children who listen to the podcast because they like it, and it's just the format that it's in. It's not scary, and it's a lot of fun. The As I said, the episodes are already being used in one Connecticut classroom at least, and I will show you this Excel spreadsheet in just a little bit so that you could say, for example, if you're teaching in Coventry, you could look up Coventry and see what different episodes we have. But more importantly, today we're going to search for Revolutionary War and see what we have. I want nothing out of this. This is all completely for free. This is me just giving back to the state. And if it helps some students or it helps you as teachers to teach history in your own way, God bless it. I'm happy that it's doing that. So these are the 35 different categories that the episodes touch on one way or another. So that it's all over the field, as you can tell. The one we're going to focus on mostly today is War Revolutionary, although as you can see, there's a lot of different episodes about different wars that Connecticut's been involved in. You could also search under colonial and development. Development meaning how did the state develop? Early, dirt roads, stagecoaches, things like that. So some of that could be Connecticut 250 as well. This is what the searchable Excel spreadsheet actually looks like, and I'm going to give you a live demo in just a second. What you'll see is that there are 195 episodes with them ranked in the order of appearance chronologically by date. So this was September 5th of 2021. Mark Twain, his final years in Reading. You can see he was a celebrity, so it's under that category. There's the guest, and the town was Reading, where he lived his last 2 years. Uh, when you get to these other columns here, I mean, all of these are searchable, but this is the where you get the benefit, is you can, first of all, go amongst the 35 different categories I just showed you and search those and see what's up in case you want to look at anything from crime to nature, you name it. You can look at particular categories. Or there's 118 different categories here or towns listed that you can search for individually or search for several. If you wanted to look at several towns in a region, for example, you could click those boxes and search. Or you could even enter the guest name if you wanted to. Now, you might see some of these are listed twice. For example, there, 3 is twice, same topic, but it's in 2 different categories. So if you search under development, it will come up. If you search under roadways, it'll come up. And these are the earthen roads, the early earthen roads in Connecticut. And similarly, we have 5 listings for the Appalachian Trail, and that's because there are 5 different towns that the Appalachian Trail went through. So you can see, they're all nature, but this is the way it would come back. If you wanted to look in Sharon, it would come back, for example. I'll just give you 2 quick examples. So if you searched for Revolutionary War in Lebanon, which is an interesting place to search because it was where the governor was living, of course, during those years. This was the winter when the Hessian soldiers, they were Hungarian and they were fighting with Rochambeau's French troops. They camped in Lebanon. It was quite a scene there for the winter, and that episode looks at that. I happened to get a hold of Rochambeau's direct descendant. It was his great, 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 do that 10 times grandson. And he commented on his ancestors' thoughts about the U.S. Revolution. And in fact, he still lives in the same house as his great, 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 great grandfather. And then George Washington, who slept in Lebanon amongst many other places in Connecticut, but that was a kind of a fun episode going around the state as to where George Washington slept. Now, if you get rid of Lebanon and put in Litchfield instead, oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way here, and put in Litchfield, you get 3 as well. Again, George Washington, he slept in Litchfield at 2 different houses, actually, so they got quite a bonus there. But Ben Franklin's son was jailed in Litchfield, and we have an entire episode on that. And then the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont, Ethan Allen and Seth Warner formed them, but they were both Connecticut residents who went north into Vermont and took care of that. As you know, Ethan Allen fought at the Fort Ticonderoga victory along with Benedict Arnold, and that's all discussed in that episode. So that's again one of the topics that you'll find. So the people that you're going to see in these different episodes or hear about, I should say, because it's an audio, not a video. But these are some of the people that are covered in these episodes, and obviously names that Sybil Ludington, you may or may not know. She was the Paul Revere of the night that the British burned Danbury. She was actually in Putnam County, New York, but went around and woke up militia to come to Danbury's aid. So we include her in topics about Connecticut. But Israel Putnam, I'm sure you've heard about. Benedict Arnold, everybody knows, was from Norwich. Washington came through, and Roger Sherman, New Milford. So, there's a lot of different famous people that are covered. What I would call the major Revolutionary War battles, I don't yet have the Battle of Greenwich, which is coming up in a few weeks, and I don't have the Battle of Fairfield, but the other ones I do. The Danbury, Ridgefield, and Saugatuck are actually all part of the same weekend. But this British raid, I'm going to show you something in just a second about this and explain why this grave has a Union Jack. but the Battle of Groton Heights was horrible. This is the one that Benedict Arnold led right near the end of the Revolutionary War. Miscellaneous, I told you about George Washington. These are the 12 houses that still stand that he slept in. There are other houses that don't stand that he slept in, but I have the addresses for these and the locations. So if you ever wanted to do a field trip or take, students there, you could definitely do that. Some are private, so you couldn't get in, but others are very much public in museums and a lot of fun to go visit. The Putnam Park, as you may know, is the Valley Forge of Connecticut. Israel Putnam led an encampment there, and we have a couple of episodes actually on that. The first cavalry unit, technically, even though it's called the second, it was the first one approved by Congress. It was Connecticut-based, and Sal Tarantino, the longtime head of that, just passed away, unfortunately, about a year ago. But it's a great story of the cavalry. And then, of course, Rochambeau marching across the state from Providence, Rhode Island, all the way down to Virginia, where he helped George Washington beat the British in the final Battle of Yorktown, which brought the Revolutionary War to an end. And those are two of the Hessian soldiers standing there in Lebanon when they camped for the winter. In all, there's 23 episodes out of the 195 that talk about the Revolutionary War one way or another. Now, I'm going to play you a sample, it's about a minute and 15 seconds of one of the audio podcasts so you can get a sense what this sounds like. And this is about that British raid on New Haven. And my guest was the author Peter Malia, who wrote about this. And the question was, why did this guy, William Campbell, end up getting buried with honors by colonial, or by Patriot soldiers? It didn't seem to make sense to most people, but that grave still exists in Connecticut today. And here's the clip.
Tell me this part of the story. The minister of the church, his name was Noah Williston. He was a Yale graduate. He lived directly across the way from the church. And lo and behold, the minister made an appearance. Unfortunate for him, British decided to, let's go have some fun. And they raced after him, some of the troopers. And in his haste to get away, he tried to hurdle a fence, got his boot caught in the fence, fell and broke his leg. And then was at the mercy of the troops, who dragged him back by his collar, poking at him with bayonets and threatening to hang him from the tree in the green.
Now, there's a guy who we have to introduce at this point, a gentleman named William Campbell, that had worked his way up, without getting into detail, into a position where he was more or less an administrative assistant to the senior brass of the British military. He hears his commotion. First of all, tell me about that. What did he do, and what did he intervene to do that day?
He was having breakfast with the other officer staff in a home kitty corner to the church on the green. He heard the commotion of the troops on the green, and being the junior officer, he was asked to go investigate. He went outside and immediately approached the troopers and asked them to release the minister, and was overheard saying, "We're here to attack the military, not civilians."
And what the episode goes on to say is that Campbell himself was killed that day, but because he had shown such empathy to the minister, and because he was so decent, the Patriots buried him with honors, even though the British committed atrocities galore in New Haven that day, as they, sacked the city. But it's a very interesting story about William Campbell, and you can go, if you happen to be based in the New Haven area, you can actually go and see this grave. It sits by itself on a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. It's a fascinating little story. So this is what I'm going to call spreadsheet playtime, and I'm going to switch now from, hopefully this will work very well. Can you all see the Excel spreadsheets? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you open up the Excel spreadsheet, and I'm not sure how familiar any of you are with Excel, some know it very well, some don't. Just going to walk through it so that you know what it looks like. So as I said before, column A, this is the episode number. You see 3 and 3 are right here, right? The earth and roads that I showed you in the demo. Here's the dates, you know, starting in September 5th and going on down. These are live links. So if you click on that, it will take you right to the Mark Twain episode. And if you want to know what it's about, here's a brief overview of what that particular episode is about. Now, this is where it gets fun to search in this area. And as I said, let's start off looking at Revolutionary War. So I'm going to close all those out, go down to the bottom here, and War, Revolutionary. Now, this says we have 65 responses, and I told you in the presentation we have 23. That's because a lot of them are double entry. So, for example, the weekend the British burned Danbury, you see the part 1, there's 6. Well, that's because it's Danbury, Ridgefield, Westport, Reading, Bethel, and Wilton, and same thing for part 2. So there's 6 entries apiece. So it adds up. This is a two-part section on the Rochambeau Trail. This is Benedict Arnold, who fought in the Battle of Ridgefield. If you're not familiar with that, that's where David Worcester, the Connecticut commander of Patriot forces, was killed when the British came inland to burn Danbury, and then the next day ended up in the Battle of Ridgefield. This is the one that in Ridgefield, there were some quickly created graves, mass graves, after that battle, and one resident in 2023, I think it was 22, was doing some renovation work in their basement and uncovered one of them. And this is the story behind that. And this is Dr. Nick Bellantoni, who many of you may know. He's a former state archaeologist. This is the one we were just talking about, the British raid with Peter Malia. This is the cavalry. This is the one that Sal Tarantino, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year or late last year. He was my guest there. The Putnam Park, the Valley Forge conditions at Putnam Park that year. Nathan Hale, which was obviously a big story. This was the Hessian soldiers. So I'm not going to read every single one of these to you. As you can see, quite a few on George Washington. But there's a lot of things you can look at. I do want to point this one out, the logistics of moving. This is basically how did Rochambeau move his 5,000 man army from Providence, Rhode Island across Connecticut, and the logistics of doing it. And one of my favorite pieces of any podcast episode I've ever done was in here, when you realize that when the French sent their 5,000 soldiers over to Providence, Rhode Island, they were all in boats, of course, and when they got there, they had not brought horses because there wouldn't have been enough room on the boats, and so they had to get horses locally, and what they ended up finding out was the horses did not understand French commands, so they ended up having to go with translators who rode with the French down to Yorktown. So that's just one of the many little things you'll find in here. But there's all sorts of great stories here, and this is just Revolutionary War. As I said, if you look at, for example, and I'll come back up here and do development of the state. And here you see, for example, the Farmington Canal, which was a little bit later than that time, but the earthen roads built during colonial America stage. Stagecoaches and trolleys obviously came a little later, but you can go through here and see if there's anything that would be of interest to you in that CT 250 region and area. I mean, the oldest ferry boat in the United States goes between Rocky Hill and South Glastonbury, and it was introduced in the 1600s, and it's still operating today. The story of the Western Reserve with Cleveland, that was founded by a guy named Cleveland from Coventry, Connecticut. So there's all sorts of stuff in here you can look at. And again, you're going to get this tool and you can go through this and search it yourself. But maybe just to show you, there's, like I said, 118 different, cities or towns in here. For example, if you just click on Bridgeport, you'll see that the Houstonic Railroad, the oldest railroad in the state, the fact that we had nuclear missiles in the state of Connecticut for 10 years and nobody knew it. The great ghost story, the Lindley Street poltergeist. This is when a submarine actually sank in Long Island Sound with 40 people aboard in 1921. And nobody remembers that story. The Bridgeport Zoo, the Lombiance collapse, for those who remember, and of course, P.T. Barnum. So there's, you can do that. I do want to point out there's one in here that bears special attention, which is it's called statewide. So this would not necessarily be of interest to a particular town, but it could be definitely of interest. The earthen roads, because we talk about roads all over the state, stagecoaches. This is the Rochambeau Trail, which of course went across the state, the floods of 55. So there's many, many different types of stories that you can look at, and decide whether or not they're for you. And if you find one and you look at the description, you go, "Huh, that sounds interesting. Uh, Let me hear it and see what it sounds like." They're all relatively short. They're all about 20 minutes. A couple go a little longer, but not much. And most of them are just around 20 minutes. So you can go through these very quickly. You can find out whether there's something you like. And if you have any like special questions or needs, you can contact me. I'm happy to work with you. I'm just going to put my contact information up here real quickly. So you can feel free to call me, text me, email me, visit my website, do whatever you want to do. There's no cost for any of this. I'm not no consulting fees or anything else, but I'm just here to try and make it useful to use these episodes in furthering education with students throughout the state of Connecticut. So let me pause there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are, first of all, any questions by anybody that I can answer.